This Sunday, I used this blanket for our children's message. And during the children's message, I confessed to the children and to our congregation that there had been mornings when I just felt like pulling this cover up over my head and hiding that day. In our gospel message on Sunday, Jesus was headed to Jerusalem. Jesus knew what was going to happen in Jerusalem. Jesus would be betrayed there, arrested, beaten, and hung on a cross to die. And as Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, some Pharisees came to him and warned him, "King Herod wants to kill you. Be smart, go hide." Not surprisingly, Jesus didn't pull the covers up over his head. Jesus didn't hide. Jesus told the Pharisees to go back to that old fox Herod and tell him that Jesus wouldn't be frightened from heading to Jerusalem and his mission. Jesus was going to do what he needed to do.
Well, like Jesus and most of us, the writer of our psalm this week, Psalm 27, knows trouble. Yet both the psalmist and Jesus do an odd thing when they're confronted with threats. They stay the course, they meet the challenge, they turn to God for help. In verse 5, the psalmist says, "For God will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble. He will conceal me under the cover of his tent. He will set me high on a rock." Now, conceal and hide here don't necessarily mean avoiding trouble. It's not like pulling a blanket over our heads so that we don't have to deal with it. It's more like the analogy Jesus uses after telling the Pharisees that he's not going to be intimidated by Herod. He talks about how he wants to protect the people of Israel. Jesus says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those who sent you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing." We have people here in the country near Tyner who have chickens, and so this analogy of a hen protecting her chicks from danger was a powerful one. Jesus wants to cover us with protection rather than help us to avoid all troubles.
And the truth is that those worries I had on the mornings that I wanted to pull the covers up over my head and hide, the worries were usually worse than what happened that day. And even on the worst of days, I survived. God covered me with his protection and his grace, and I made it through each and every day so far.
For the last couple of years, Jeff and I have been doing the devotional booklet, Our Utmost for His Highest by Oswald Chambers. And there's a lot of challenging lessons in it. But on March 15th this year, he said something that really hit home with me. He wrote, "The discipline of dismay is an essential lesson which a disciple must learn." And there were many times in the Gospels where the disciples had to face the discipline of dismay by something Jesus said or did. The discipline of dismay really resonated with me.
And me too.
Because on days when I feel discouraged or overwhelmed or depressed or just at the end of my rope, can I have the discipline to go to God with my dismay? In my younger years, I was often tempted to pull the covers over my head when I worked full-time and had kids, and I just felt overwhelmed by all the things I had to do. But today, at this time in our lives, I feel more likely to want to stay in bed and pull the covers over my head when I'm dismayed by the bad news I know I'm going to hear when I get up, when I know I'm going to face wave after wave of misinformation that seems to be intended to punish the most vulnerable in our society. It feels a little bit like the song for this week, Avril Lavigne's Head Above Water. She writes, "God, keep my head above water. Don't let me drown. It gets harder. I'll meet you there at the altar as I fall down to my knees. Don't let me drown, drown, drown."
There are lots of reasons to want to pull the covers up over our heads these days. And it's okay to take breaks when we need them. It's okay to get some rest. But let's not be frightened away from doing what God is calling us to do. And remember that God is always with us. And he has a promise for us if we get out from underneath the covers and get after it for him. Like the psalmist, I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and take heart. Wait for the Lord. Amen.